Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and this is Titanfall 2 from Respawn Entertainment, and I'm playing it on a Core i7 6700K PC overclocked to 4.6 GHz. But I've also got the Titan X Pascal attached, and this is what enables 4K 60 gameplay on just about every modern title that I've run on it. Now, Titanfall 2 may not be the most technologically advanced shooter on the market. It's really aiming to get a balance between quality visuals and a locked 60 frames per second. So let's talk about some of the settings that I've got here. So essentially I've got everything on max here, and well, the PC version actually has a number of really interesting settings that you can adjust. So obviously there's the resolution and aspect ratio support there, and there's also an adjustable field of view and an interesting smooth sprint view, which is designed to reduce screen shake when you're sprinting outside of the Titan. But it's really in the advanced settings where things get interesting. Vsync, there's a whole manner of different options there. Double and triple buffer Vsync, adaptive Vsync if you've got NVIDIA, obviously just Vsync off. Yeah, and double and triple buffered Vsync, that's really interesting because if you want the lowest possible latency, and you possibly would for a game like Titanfall, double buffer is the way to go. However, if you're not locked to the optimal frame rate, 60 FPS in the case of this particular display, then you will drop hard if you have the double buffer enabled. The triple buffering actually keeps the frame in memory to kind of deploy if there are issues with performance. For this particular demo though, I stuck with double buffer here because the Titan X for the most part does have the horsepower to get the job done. But what I will note is that later on in the game there were a couple of small performance drops, and they were really felt. In that case, adaptive Vsync or triple buffering would have been the way forward. And of course you could always run with Vsync turned off completely, which would offer the lowest latency possible. It's just not the way that I like to play games, but I do realise that there's a lot of first-person shooter fanatics out there that absolutely swear by it, especially for competitive play. But here I'm in the single-player campaign, and for me it's all about the experience. Other settings we've got here, TSAA. Now this is really interesting because Titanfall 2 is using temporal anti-aliasing, and what that generally means is that in order to smooth off the image, information from the previous frames is used to smooth off the jaggies, and it works exceptionally well in this particular game. And it really works well in smoothing off the edges, and it's especially important on the console versions of the game where there's a dynamic resolution in place. Previously we thought it was a 720p 900p fixed frame buffer with really good temporal anti-aliasing smoothing off the edges, but it actually turns out that resolution adjusts on the fly according to GPU load. Obviously here though, with the Titan X, with the PC, we are locked to 4K resolution, which is fantastic. So coming into this game, what really impressed me on the console versions was that absolute 60 Hz lock. Well, there is, occasional frame rate drops here and there, but it is by far the most consistent 60 FPS first person shooter that I've played for a long time, on the consoles at least. And another thing which is really impressive about Titanfall 2 is just the huge array of technical advances that Respawn Entertainment have made since they shipped the original Titanfall. So immediately texture quality is on a completely different level to the first Titanfall, which did have some really low resolution assets there, even when viewed from a just sort of mid-distance. And close up they looked really pixelated, and in this scene here with the pilot there, you can see that texture quality is really holding up rather nicely. Lighting obviously is a huge improvement over the first game as well, and I suspect that Respawn have possibly moved to a deferred shading solution to allow for more numerous amounts of light sources on screen. And I just think in general the post-process pipeline that Respawn have come up with for this sequel is a huge, massive improvement. You can see there whenever we use the iron sights on the weapon that a depth of field effect kicks in, but just generally speaking, atmospheric rendering, alpha, the whole shooting match, bloom, It's just a world apart from the first game. It's really, really impressive stuff. And also I think there's much more in the way of technological ambition in the levels here. Now, you know, obviously in a level like this there's a lot of foliage going on. It's not particularly easy work for the GPU, but you know, the developer seems to be able to throw a huge amount of detail around in that respect, and it's really impressive work overall. And it's actually in those areas on the console versions where the resolution seems to dip the most. So PC, obviously you can power past that there. And in terms of PC optimization, well, this is actually the first time that I have played Titanfall, and I've obviously gone for the top end rig right to begin with. But one thing that I found really interesting was that one of Respawn's key staff members, Drew McCoy, actually produced a blog post on their website where they benchmarked their own game with a big bunch of GPUs from both Nvidia and AMD, and I really like when developers do that. The Coalition Gears of War 4, they did something similar recently, and it shows a real kind of commitment to showing just how optimized your PC port is. And from my perspective, that's really important, because minimum specs, recommended specs, you never know what the experience is that you're actually going to get from them. And I really like the idea that developers are actually coming up with numbers that you can actually verify yourself, and it really shows a lot of confidence in the product. And I'm going to be running some mid-range GPU tests as soon as I can. I'm going to be concentrating on the current mainstream favorites, GTX 1060, RX 470. If I have time, I'll look into the more budget-orientated cards, 460 and 1050 Ti. But, you know, it's all looking really impressive so far. One thing I will say though is that we are actually getting some frame rate drops on the Titan X in really taxing scenes. It's really rare that the frame rate actually drops at all. You will see some dips here and there, particularly when a lot of alpha transparencies are on screen. Bandwidth is at a premium at 4K, even with the Titan X Pascal in some games. But by and large, we are getting that lot 60 FPS that you kind of want, really, if you've got a 4K screen. And this is actually of crucial importance for a game like Titanfall. I think I've said something about this in the console performance analysis video that I put up the other day. Now, what's really important about a Respawn game in particular is that the whole experience is designed to be played at this level of fluidity. These guys are the team that produced the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the game that kind of redefined the first-person shooter for the last generation, and to be honest, the guiding principles that were laid down in that title kind of persist to today. Well, I say that. Now, if you go back and play the original Call of Duty, again, it's really tightly locked to 60 frames per second for the vast majority of the experience, but you will note that subsequent Call of Duty games, particularly the ones from Treyarch, kind of pushed the envelope in terms of visuals at the expense of frame rate. Now, Titanfall is kind of like a return to the good old days, where frame rate really does take priority here, to the point where the team was so serious about it that they actually implemented that dynamic resolution scaler on the console versions, just to ensure that the 60Hz limit is adhered to as closely as possible for the vast majority of the experience. And it is really crucial here. You've got a low latency rendering pipeline. This is the whole reason that Respawn actually chose the Source engine to begin with. The more advanced you go with your rendering pipeline, the more latency generally tends to be added. So yeah, the original Titanfall, it was kind of, I don't know, almost agricultural in a way in terms of the sophistication of the rendering technology, and it was entirely down to creating the lowest possible latency in the rendering pipeline. And obviously with Titanfall 2, Respawn have been able to retain that ultra low latency, but they have been able to pile up the visual effects somewhat, which is great news. But the point is that latency comes in many different shapes and forms. Now obviously you've got your display latency, but Respawn can't really do much about that. What they can do is to ensure the lowest possible latency within the game. So yeah, it starts at the renderer, but performance is also of crucial importance. So keeping 60 frames per second obviously produces the lowest latency, the tightest feel of the controls. And also another thing to bear in mind is that when you do lose frame rate, it tends to be when the screen is really busy, when there's a lot going on. And in a first-person shooter, that's the time where you need that kind of response to be at its best. So yeah, you know, it's really interesting that Respawn have dedicated so much engineering effort to getting that locked 60 frames per second on the consoles, and these days consoles are so closely associated with PC from a technology perspective that any kind of optimization for a console tends to work out pretty well on the PC, and that's kind of why you see a lot of games these days with really good scalability. Okay, so we're approaching the last few minutes of this particular 4K 60 Let's Play, and it is actually where we first get into a fully powered up Titan. And this is where we really get to see the engine pushed. And as we move into the last few minutes of this particular demonstration, something that I really wanted to get across, which, you know, I don't really tend to emphasize enough, I think, at times, is that this game is just absolutely brilliant to play. And obviously performance and technical elements play a huge part in that, but there's also just the fact that the developers have got so much right in terms of the way the game feels, you know, inertia, momentum, the feel when you're running, jumping, wall running, and indeed the melee attack, which is just absolutely insane. It just feels really good, and it just feels even better at 60 frames per second. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of first-person shooters to choose from in the run-up to the holiday season here. Obviously you've got Battlefield 1, which is brilliant. Call of Duty is incoming, which I'm really looking forward to playing. But obviously Titanfall may not have the same kind of franchise credentials as those titles yet, but I really would strongly recommend that you try this one out. I mean, it really is one of the best playing shooters that I've had the pleasure of enjoying for quite some time, and also the campaign is absolutely superb. Obviously it hasn't really been that much of a focus for many developers, and I guess that's why people really liked Doom 2016 so much. It was just so much fun to play from a single player perspective. What I'll say about Titanfall is that not only is the campaign absolutely brilliant, but the multiplayer package is superb as well. I mean, I've just had so much fun with this game, and I'm really looking forward to playing more. But I think I'm going to wrap it up there. If you'd like to see more 4K 60 FPS Let's Plays, please do like and subscribe. Let us know what you think about the game in the comments, and I will see you soon. Thanks for watching.
First floor ready. First floor activated.